Welcome back to the GSMC Sports Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. We just talked about the San Francisco 49ers and some of their struggles on this past Saturday during their divisional round matchup against the Packers. Now, speaking of the Packers and others, there has been a good amount of coaching change, as there always is come the offseason. So we are going to be giving an update on all of the coaching moves across the league so far. Now, starting off, we have a head coaching hire from the Tennessee Titans, and there have been a few times on the show that I've mentioned just how much talent there is in the coaching carousel right now. It's actually a name I have not yet mentioned. That is, they hired the Bengals offensive coordinator, Brian Callahan. Callahan has been the Bengals offensive coordinator for the past 5 seasons. He was really helpful in bringing Joe Burrow along. Now, Joe Burrow, a great talent, of course, but there is always that little bit of adjustment to the NFL. I think that Callahan has done a very good job doing so. Now, Cincinnati disappointed this season, but I don't think that you could point to Callahan for the reason why that would be the case. They were dealt some poor hands, I should say, when it comes to Joe Burrow injuries. He had the calf injury in the preseason that kept him out for most of training camp. And when he came back, he still wasn't 100%. You could see him with the massage gun on the sideline frequently, but he started to ramp up eventually. Bengals had a big win against the 49ers, who we just talked about. And at that moment, it was like, okay, they are sort of coming back to life here. These are the Bengals we know. And then just a few weeks later on primetime television against the Ravens, he goes down again with a season-ending injury with a torn ligament in his wrist. So, unfortunate. Burrow ends up only playing 10 games, and even in those 10 games, he was maybe at close to full strength for just 2 or 3 of those, if that. So, an unfortunate season for Bengals fans. Now, I thought that Brian Callahan, despite the obstacles, I thought that he still handled it pretty well. I thought that Jake Browning, the backup quarterback, when he came in, I thought that he was really impressive, especially in the game against the Jaguars. I thought that he was great. And I think that when you consider all of the factors that went into this Bengals season, I don't think that Callahan really should be at fault. Now, they have a very talented offense, for sure. They have Joe Mixon, a great running back, and they have had, up to this point, maybe the best receiver trio in the league between Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, and totally blanking on the third receiver right now. But they've had a very good offensive skill position group around them. And now, on the other side of the ball, what happens, as we've seen plenty of times, is once you sort of have this rise up, you have to start paying guys, and you can't pay everybody, so there ends up being a lot of turnover. That was the case, especially in the secondary for Cincinnati's defense, and as a result, they took a step back. They had a lot of youth in that group, and they just weren't the same effective group that they were for their Super Bowl run a couple years ago. They were 27th in pass defense, 26th in run defense, and 22nd in scoring. So they were not a great group this year. I just think that all of this is important because if you are asking yourself, well, why would the Bengals offensive coordinator get a head coaching job after this season? I think that it's important to consider the circumstances that they were under, and that they were, it's a body of work over the handful of these years. And I think that this is probably a pretty good hire for the Titans. Now, do I think that they should have moved on from Mike Vrabel even in the first place? No. So we'll see how this all plays out. I like Vrabel a lot, and I think that there was a lot of talent in the pool. I think that as far as coordinator jobs go, I know that he can't really do these interviews and fully commit to a job yet, but I really like Ben Johnson of the Lions, the offensive coordinator there. So all in all, I think this is about a B signing for them. I think that they could have possibly done better. They definitely could have done worse, though. So I'd give it about a B, just off of initial reactions here. On to Philadelphia, where they just yesterday fired their offensive coordinator, Brian Johnson. Now, this goes along with the firing of their defensive coordinator, Sean Desai, a few days ago. Matt Patricia, who took over defensive play calling duties and a lot of Desai's responsibilities around the 10-1 mark. I believe it was after one of those losses that Patricia took over, and Patricia is no longer expected to be back either. He has an expiring contract coming up in this offseason. It expired come this offseason, and it's not expected that he will be back. So another offseason of sort of getting a fresh slate here in Philadelphia, because last year, if you'll remember, they had both their offensive coordinator and defensive coordinator hired to head coaching positions elsewhere in the league. Shane Steichen, he went on to the Colts, and defensive coordinator Jonathan Gannon was hired by the Cardinals. So another offseason of a clean house here in Philadelphia. They had a collapse, and after starting 10-1, and this is sort of what happens when you fall as far as they do. I agree with them keeping Nick Sirianni. I'm not the biggest Nick Sirianni fan myself, but I think that's just more of, I don't really like his antics. The players seem to really have his back, though. Fletcher Cox called a reporter a clown, I think, when he was asked about Sirianni's future. If you have the locker room, that's where it all begins. And if the players are there for Sirianni, then I think that they can't let Sirianni go after 2 seasons, a Super Bowl appearance, one that they very easily could have won, and then, yes, a disappointing this year, but still a playoff run, still a playoff appearance, I should say. There wasn't much running when they got there, but I think that keeping him is the right decision. So naturally, the steps of progression are that the coordinators are going to go. So we will see where the Eagles choose to go from there. Now, I sort of alluded to it earlier in the first segment. Joe Barry has been fired from the Green Bay Packers. He was their defensive coordinator for a few seasons, 3, I believe. And it's not a huge surprise, really. If you were following the Packers during the regular season, they were not very good on the defensive side of the ball. And really, for years, there's been complaints about the misuse of players. Jair Alexander, while he does struggle with health, yes, he is one of the best cornerbacks in the league. And a lot of people have been, Packers fans specifically, have been very concerned about the way that he chooses to use him and the other talent on that side of the ball. So I'm not surprised, but I think that it is interesting. He probably, Joe Barry that is, put together 2 of his best coaching performances in the playoffs. Now, a lot of it was the Cowboys collapsing. There was some really weird stuff going on there in Dallas in the first round with CeeDee Lamb and Dak Prescott from the first play not getting along there. So, I don't know. You can make the argument that it was self-inflicted by the other teams. It was the weather against San Francisco, but I thought that he did actually sort of have at least a chance of keeping his job just because of those last 2 games, but again, not surprised ultimately when it comes to the Packers' decision to move on. So, talking about some head coaching stuff, still don't have a ton of news on that other than the Titans' decision, but we've at least heard some rumblings, some buzz about what is going on with the other top candidates here. Now, Bill Belichick, he has taken 2 meetings with the Atlanta Falcons. He's been very heavily linked with them from the beginning of the offseason. Now, it's interesting that the interviews really aren't going much further than Atlanta at this point. I thought that there would maybe be some more potential suitors. The Chargers, a lot of people liked to link to him because there's a quarterback there and he just has to correct this defense that has been horrible for them the past few years under Brandon Staley. But I can at least understand, it's the West Coast for Belichick. You got to keep in mind how old he is, the lifestyle that he wants to live. I'm not shocked that there isn't mutual interest there. I thought that Washington would be a little bit more of an interesting location, and there really hasn't been much noise there. I don't actually think that Ron Rivera has been officially let go yet at this point. I could be wrong on that. I think that, and I'm not, I don't like to advocate for people losing their jobs, but I think it would be crazy if they went into next season with Ron Rivera as well. Now, they have Eric Bieniemy on the coaching staff there already, so I don't know if they have some sort of a succession plan as it is there, but not a lot of love for Bill Belichick as far as the coaching carousel has gone up to this point, which I just find interesting. One of the other key names in this offseason of coaching, Jim Harbaugh, likely to make the switch from college football back to the NFL. The Chargers have been very much linked to him. We'll sort of get on that a little bit. He is, I did see a report that he is still reportedly in play for the Falcons as well. So the Falcons have been taking a lot of interviews up to this point. Even with interviewing Bill Belichick 2 times, they are keeping their options open. And that could include Jim Harbaugh, but off of the jump of the offseason, and really once Harbaugh left Michigan, a lot of people have been talking about him to the Chargers. Now, interestingly enough, there has been some recent reports that Pete Carroll is actually potentially in play for that job as well. I don't think that he was really looking to coach elsewhere when he was told that he wasn't going to be returning as the coach next season for the Seahawks. And this is actually the main destination he would want to go to if that were the case. So still monitoring a lot of this stuff. It's interesting though how these 3 legendary coaches of their own right are sort of connected for these same jobs, trying to battle it out here. So I am very interested in how this plays out. It's also worth mentioning that the Raiders have retained Antonio Pierce, their interim coach for this past season. He will be the head coach going into next year. I think that's the far and away clear choice for the Raiders after really screwing up a couple years ago when they had the interim coach situation, and they end up bringing in Josh McDaniels, and that was bad from the jump. So I'm glad that Antonio Pierce gets his chance. The players loved him there, and it just seemed like the right thing to do. So that is the NFL coaching carousel update. We are going to be sticking with head coaching gigs in the next segment when we jump to the NBA, and we will be talking about some breaking news from the association, so stick around.